Chapter 3100 When Shafong, Crimson Heart, Bloodhammer, and the others opened their eyes again, what entered their vision was a dark and moonless sky. The only thing they could see in the sky were floating landmasses. When Shafong, Crimson Heart, Bloodhammer, and the others opened their eyes again, what entered their vision was a dark and moonless sky. The only thing they could see in the sky were floating landmasses. Before Shafong and the others could get a good feel of their surroundings, a series of system notifications rang in their ears. System, you have discovered the stratified abyssal realm. System, all communication with your homeworld has been severed. System, due to the influence of the abyss's power, your physique is reduced by 50%, and your 5 senses are weakened by 30%. System, the gravity in the stratified abyssal realm is 5 times greater than God's domain. Your mobility is weakened drastically. System, the stratified abyssal realm's level limit is 120. You are unable to get promoted to Tier 4 while you remain here. This restriction will only be removed when you enter a higher world. The system notifications stunned Shafong and the others. They might not have lost any basic attributes after entering the stratified abyssal realm, but their physique and 5 senses were weakened significantly. The gravity acting on their bodies had also increased drastically. In a situation where all sorts of level 105 plus Grand Lord ranked abyssal beasts surrounded them, receiving such penalties would put them through hell. At this time, even Shafong had a headache over these penalties. Everyone in their group might be above level 105, but under the stratified abyssal realm's suppression, they couldn't even exhibit half of their usual combat power. In their current situation, the only ones who stood a chance against the level 105 plus Grand Lords roaming around them were players who had converted to another race like himself, Hidden Soul, and the Tower Alliance's members. Even domain realm experts such as Crimson Heart and Cleansed Rue would have difficulty going up against a level 105 Grand Lord by themselves. As for Su Qianliu and the others, they could just barely fight against a great lord of the same level. When Gentle Snow tried using her mana domain, she couldn't help but exclaim, the suppression here is absurd. Even though the mana here is so dense, I can only extend my mana domain up to 30 yards away. That's only 1/3 of my usual range, that's normal. Over 70% of the mana here is of the dark element, Shafong explained as he scanned his surroundings. Skills and spells that aren't of the dark element will be drastically weakened here. Conversely, dark skills and spells will be strengthened. When observing his surroundings with the eyes of reality, Shafong could see everything for what it was. Particularly, his ability to see the composition of the mana around him had reached an extreme extent. Meanwhile, the stratified abyssal realm's mana composition was so skewed that it surprised even him. Even in special elemental worlds, the dominant element there wouldn't occupy more than 30% of the world's mana. Yet, it was already more than enough to amplify the power of attacks of that element by 100% or more. Yet, the dark element occupied over 70% of the stratified abyssal realm's mana. This situation was incredibly disadvantageous for players like themselves, who had spent most of their time living in God's domain. Fortunately for Shafong, he had the Abyssal Eye, and it could reduce all hostile dark-type effects by 50%. Meanwhile, this effect encompassed even the suppression coming from the stratified abyssal realm. So, while he still couldn't exhibit 100% of his usual combat power, he could still exhibit 70% of it. After a brief discussion between Shafong, Crimson Heart, and Bloodhammer, they decided to move as a team until they reached a settlement in the stratified abyssal realm. After all, there were many abyssal beasts around them. It'd be more efficient if they broke through this area with more people. Subsequently, after everyone decided on a general direction to move in, they began advancing and killing the abyssal beasts in their path. The abyssal beasts came in all sorts of shapes and sizes, 3-headed wolves and twin-headed lions, to name a few. Although their levels only ranged between level 105 and level 110, and the majority of them were at the Great Lord rank, the challenge difficulty of these monsters gave Crimson Heart and the others a scare. Why do these monsters have such quick reaction speeds? Crimson Heart exclaimed as she fought against a Great Lord ranked 3-headed hellhound. She had thrust her spear at the Great Lord over a dozen times, yet only 3 of her attacks had landed. There wasn't anything special about the three-headed hellhound's basic attributes. Each of her attacks caused over 600,000 damage to the Great Lord. Meanwhile, the three-headed hellhound only had 50 million HP, so it wouldn't take her more than 100 attacks to take it down. However, unlike the Great Lords she was used to fighting, the three-headed hellhound's dodging capabilities practically rivaled refinement realm experts. Combined with the penalties she was currently suffering from, the three-headed hellhound's challenge difficulty was greater than even Great Lords found in the miniature ancient world. These monsters aren't the only problem. Our stamina is also depleting much more rapidly here than on our homeworld. The consumption rate has increased by at least 5 times. We have to end the fight and leave this place quickly, Maria, the Demidragon woman from the Tower Alliance, said, a frown forming on her face as she fought against a Grand Lord ranked Abyssal two-headed manticore. It wouldn't have been a problem if the monsters here were merely more challenging than normal. However, the increase in stamina consumption was a fatal problem. Under normal circumstances, they could fight continuously for at least 10 hours before having to rest. However, they could, at most, fight for 2 hours continuously while subjected to this penalty. A Grand Lord here had upwards of 200 million. Even if all 20 of them attacked a Grand Lord together, they'd still need 3 to 5 minutes to take it down. In a situation where each monster group had 6 or 7 Grand Lords and at least 40 Great Lords, it would only take 5 or 6 monster groups to kill them from stamina exhaustion. Everyone nodded their heads when they heard Maria's words. Immediately, they started using stronger attacks to finish these abyssal beasts as quickly as possible. After all, it was common sense that the longer a fight dragged out, the higher the chances of the fight attracting other nearby monsters. After fighting for nearly half an hour, Shifeng and the others finally defeated the group of 50 or so abyssal beasts. As these abyssal beasts died one after another, everyone noticed that the stratified abyssal realms monsters provided significantly less EXP than the monsters in God's domain. It was only 1/3 of what they were used to receiving. Moreover, the items they dropped were unexpectedly few. The 40+ Great Lords they defeated had only dropped a bunch of beast materials and nothing else. Even the Grand Lords had only dropped a bunch of materials and 6 pitchblack ore pieces. Find the original at H*stead novel. Isn't the stratified abyssal realm supposed to be a land of riches? Why is the loot of these monsters so terrible? Bloodhammer was greatly confused as he looked at the loot they acquired. This situation was completely different from the information they had gathered on the stratified abyssal realm. It should be known that the beast materials were only good for making food and nothing else. As for the ore pieces, as far as he could tell, they did not contain an astonishing amount of energy within them. At best, this black metal could be considered a type of rare metal and nothing more. While it was still a good item, it didn't make sense that this was all of the loot 6 Grand Lords had to offer. No, this is indeed a land of riches, Shifeng said, shaking his head as he looked at the black metal piece in his hand. This dark ore isn't as simple as it looks. It might not contain an astonishing amount of energy, but you'll get the black iron that you're familiar with as long as you refine it. I'm sure I don't have to explain the effects of black iron to you, right? Black iron. This is the raw material of black iron. Bloodhammer was filled with disbelief as he looked at the dark ore in his hand. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3101 Is that true, Guild Leader Black Flame? Is that true, Guild Leader Black Flame? Maria, who was resting nearby, couldn't help but stand up and look at Shifeng with a fervent look on her face when she heard Shifeng's words. Weapons made using black iron were incredibly durable, and these weapons had gained themselves a nickname since primordial times. Immortal weapons. Black iron was an incredibly rare material used for weapon production in the greater God's domain. Demand for it was much greater than supply, and it was a resource frenziedly fought over by the various powers in the greater God's domain. This was because only weapons made using black iron were tough enough to go up against Tier 4 mythic monsters and above in the greater God's domain. If a weapon wasn't made using black iron, even an epic weapon would last no more than a fight when used against the greater God's domain's mythic monsters. Afterward, it'd have to be repaired. Naturally, Epic weapons made without black iron would wear out even quicker when used against superior mythic monsters or above. Such epic weapons were almost certain to break in the middle of the raid. Meanwhile, the consequences of such a situation happening went without saying. Players would be fortunate if they could retain even 10% of their combat power if they tried to fight barehanded. Because of this, weapons made using black iron were incredibly valuable in the greater god's domain. Even a secret silver weapon made using black iron would be worth dozens of times more than an epic weapon made without black iron. When teams were recruiting members to head out into the fields, players without black iron weapons would even be disqualified automatically. To make matters worse, in addition to being incredibly rare, black iron was also incredibly challenging to process into weapons. Even a Grandmaster Forger could only achieve a 30% success rate when producing a fine gold weapon. Moreover, this was only the success rate on paper. Any lifestyle player would know that the 30% success rate the system showed was a big fat lie. With a theoretical success rate of 30%, a lifestyle player would typically succeed only once out of 10 tries, 2 out of 10 tries if they were incredibly lucky. As for dark gold weapons and above, the success rate of producing them was even lower. Due to these factors, black iron was incredibly rare and precious in the greater god's domain. Currently, the market price for one piece of black iron was 5 units of 7 luminaries crystal. It should be known that 7 luminaries crystals was necessary for players to reach tier 6. Even in the greater god's domain, the supply of 7 luminaries crystals was very low. Any mine and regional dungeon that produced 7 luminaries crystals would become a target of competition for the greater god's domain's hegemonic powers. Yet, one piece of black iron could easily fetch 5 units of 7 luminaries crystal. Even then, rarely anybody would trade their black iron away for 7 luminaries crystals. Thus, Maria was greatly surprised to learn that the Grand Lords they had just killed had dropped the raw material for black iron. It should be known that there were numerous Grand Lords in this area, and every monster group had at least 6 or 7 Grand Lords. If news of this matter spread to the greater god's domain, the various hegemonic powers would definitely do everything they could to gain access to this place. Don't look at me like that. I am a forger, so I can still determine the materials necessary to make black iron, Shifeng said, chuckling when he looked at Maria's excited expression. Honestly, if he weren't a Grandmaster Forger during his previous life, he wouldn't have realized that the inconspicuous dark ore was the raw material needed to produce black iron. This was because even in the greater god's domain, most players only knew black iron for what it was. They thought that black iron was something that occurred naturally in nature. They didn't know that black iron was actually a man-made product. There were many powers that weren't aware of this secret. Of course, that was only limited to the weaker powers. The various hegemonic powers naturally knew of this secret, and so did a small portion of peak powers. This information could be considered a secret that wasn't a secret among the greater god's domain's top circle. However, Shifeng didn't mind sharing this secret with Bloodhammer and Maria. After all, it didn't really matter even if they knew that black iron was a man-made product and what it was made from. Even if they managed to get their hands on black iron's raw material, they couldn't do anything with it without the design to craft black iron. It'd simply be an ordinary piece of ore. Of course, black iron ore could also be found in the greater god's domain. Only, the places that produced black iron ore were thoroughly monopolized by the various peak and hegemonic powers. Other powers had no way of interjecting at all, and their only option was to find them in the various stratified abyssal realms. In fact, according to Shifeng's knowledge, the places that produced black iron ore in the greater god's domain were actually stratified abyssal realms that had broken their respective seals and were introduced into the greater god's domain. Meanwhile, as soon as Shifeng finished speaking, both Maria and Bloodhammer started looking at the Grand Lords around them in a different light. As for Crimson Heart and the others, they couldn't help but be confused by Shifeng's conversation with Maria. Even so, judging by Maria's reaction, it was obvious that the dark ore they acquired was incredibly valuable, so valuable that it could stir the desires of even suspected god-ranked experts like Maria and Bloodhammer. There isn't much time left before nightfall, so let's quickly leave this place. We'll most likely die if we have to face the increased number of monsters at night, Shifeng said, giving Maria and Bloodhammer a reminder when he saw that the two were looking to hunt more Grand Lord-ranked two-headed manticores. Maria and Bloodhammer promptly snapped back to their senses when they heard Chifeng's words. Then, the team resumed advancing and searching for places with a water source. No matter the world and regardless if it was for players or NPCs, the precondition to establishing a settlement was to build it near a water source. The precondition for establishing a settlement was to build it near a water source. This condition held true for all worlds, players, and NPCs. Hence, if they managed to find a water source, there was a high chance they'd find an NPC settlement nearby. After traveling in this wasteland covered in floating islands for around 4 hours, Chifeng and the others arrived at a place with countless ancient trees and rocks that measured several hundred meters in height. As soon as they arrived here, they suddenly heard the sounds of battle. In addition, they also saw a towering pillar of fire rising in the distance, coupled with the sounds of thunder and glaring streaks of lightning coming down from the sky. Immediately, Chifeng and the others grew alert. "That should be Shadow Thunder, a Tier 3 curse," Cleansed Rue said as she looked at the dark red lightning bolts in the distant sky. "Judging by its power, a player should have cast it, so there should be players fighting there. Moreover, it should be quite a big fight by the looks of it." Shadow Thunder was a super large-scale destruction spell. So, one would typically only use it in a fight involving large numbers. "Should we go and take a look, Guild Leader Black Flame?" Crimson Heart asked as she turned to Chifeng. Based on their journey thus far, Crimson Heart noticed that Chifeng was much more knowledgeable about the stratified abyssal realm than everyone else. Even Maria and Bloodhammer couldn't help but listen to Chifeng's instructions. Moreover, if she were to rank the 3 groups in their team based on combat power, Zero Wings group would rank first, while the Tower Alliances group would rank second, and 100 Flower Palaces group would rank last. So, it was completely normal for her to seek Chifeng's opinion on how they should proceed. At this time, Maria and Bloodhammer had similarly turned to Chifeng seeking his opinion. "Of course we're going to take a look. This is our first encounter with other players. If we miss this opportunity, who knows when another one will appear. There's also only 2 hours left until nightfall," Chifeng said, chuckling when he saw everyone turning their gazes to him. "But we have to be careful when approaching them. You mustn't underestimate the strength of the stratified Abyssal Realms players no matter what. If we create a misunderstanding, we will be the ones to suffer." Everyone nodded their heads and put on their black cloaks to hide their information. Then, they followed Chifeng toward the distant battlefield. Although Hidden Soul, Gentle Snow, and the others from Zero Wings group knew next to nothing about the stratified Abyssal Realm, they knew that any player capable of living in the stratified Abyssal Realms environment would be far superior to the average player in God's domain. Not to mention, their stamina consumption rate here was significantly greater than in the miniature ancient world. In such a situation, individual combat power would be severely restricted, and quantity would play a much more important role than quality. If they accidentally provoked one of the major native powers, the fate that awaited them here would be even worse than if they provoked one of the 5 great superguilds in the miniature ancient world. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3102 Over 1,000 players were clashing by the river next to the forest of towering trees and rocks. Over 1,000 players were clashing by the river next to the forest of towering trees and rocks. If one were to inspect these players with an identification skill, one would find that in addition to being at level 110 or above, these players were all geared in epic weapons and equipment. Quite a few of these players were even in possession of fragmented legendary items. At a glance, it was obvious that these players were split into 2 opposing groups. Of the 2 groups, the first group was composed of around 400 players trying to defend a caravan, while the second group was composed of around 700 players trying to rob the caravan. Even though this battle involved only around 1,000 players, Crimson Heart, Lin Yaoyu, and the others, who were spectating the fight from over 1,000 yards away, couldn't help but be shocked by what they saw. This was because even the weakest player involved in the fight was a Refinement Realm expert. Moreover, despite being only at the Refinement Realm standard, this expert managed to exhibit combat power rivaling the Void Realm experts, also known as peak experts. It should be known that peak experts were rare existences in their god's domain, so much so that they would be given an executive position in any superpower. In first-rate guilds, Void Realm experts would even be granted positions that allowed them to influence the organization's decisions, their authority rivaling the guild's vice-guild leaders. Yet, the peak experts they came to know as being rare had seemingly become no different from cabbages that were readily available. After all, every player fighting on the battlefield by the river had strength rivaling or surpassing peak experts. Meanwhile, the clash between the two groups of players ahead was even more shocking than an all-out war between two superpowers in their god's domain. The battlefield's terrain had even undergone significant changes because of these players' battle. Isn't the development of magic technology a little too advanced in this world? Has their manufacturing capabilities become so developed that they can afford to use siege weapons for measly caravan escorts? Bloodhammer couldn't help but doubt his eyes when he saw the dozen or so 10-meter-tall metal frames fighting on the battlefield. Combat puppets. Combat puppets could be regarded as weapons designed for the specific purpose of sieging cities. Even the weakest basic combat puppet possessed strength at the Tier 3 peak standard. In other words, even a Tier 1 player could instantly gain raw strength at the Tier 3 peak standard so long as they got inside a basic combat puppet. Moreover, depending on the user's ability to control a combat puppet, the combat puppet could also exhibit combat power far surpassing its strength level. It was akin to how ordinary experts and refinement realm experts could exhibit vastly different combat powers even when both of them possessed the same basic attributes. However, combat puppets would typically only be used to siege or defend cities in the various worlds of God's domain. It simply wasn't a resource that players could afford to waste on a simple caravan escort. Yet, these players from the stratified abyssal realm had not only dispatched multiple combat puppets for a caravan escort, but there was even an advanced combat puppet among them. Combat puppets could be separated into different ranks. A few examples would be basic combat puppets, advanced combat puppets, bronze combat puppets, and high bronze combat puppets. Higher-ranking ones, such as silver combat puppets, also existed, but they were extremely rare even in the greater god's domain. In the case of advanced combat puppets, they could exhibit strength nearing the Tier 4 standard. Including their defensive capabilities that surpassed mythic monsters, an advanced combat puppet could effortlessly clash against a Tier 4 mythic monster if piloted by a refinement realm expert. Needless to say, an advanced combat puppet would have a very easy time dealing with Tier 3 players. However, the team trying to plunder the caravan similarly had an advanced combat puppet. Moreover, the player piloting it appeared to be much more skilled, allowing the advanced combat puppet to exhibit combat standards at the Void Realm standard. Even though Bloodhammer was a god-ranked expert equipped with a fragmented legendary weapon, if he had to go up against an advanced combat puppet with such a high combat standard, the only thing he could do was run away. There was no way he stood a chance against such an opponent, not when he was suffering from such powerful penalties because of the stratified Abyssal Realms environment. While Bloodhammer, Crimson Heart, and the others were awed by the stratified Abyssal Realms magic technology standard, Shifeng had his eyes glued to a boy with golden markings in his eyes and a crimson-haired girl wielding a divine staff. The boy looked like he was only around 17 or 18 years old. However, even when he was surrounded by a group of a dozen or so peak and apex experts, he still managed to freely dance around his opponents while swinging multiple longswords. If not for two domain realm experts, who were also third-floor experts, limiting his range of movement, the boy would have long since killed the other peak and apex experts surrounding him. The girl wielding the divine staff wasn't an ordinary individual, either. Despite being an oracle, she single-handedly stopped an attack of several hundred arrows and spells with just a contract barrier, a Tier 3 curse. Thousand Sword Saint Wordless Ember and Dawn Saint Sleeping Quicksand. Why are these two people here? Could this be the nation of ancient gods? When Shifeng saw the boy and girl fighting against multiple opponents on the battlefield, the shock he felt was much greater than the shock Bloodhammer and the others felt when they saw the combat puppets. During Shifeng's previous life, Wordless Ember and Sleeping Quicksand were legendary individuals in the greater god's domain, and their titles of Thousand Sword Saint and Dawn Saint were known by all. Meanwhile, The Bloody Poem adventurer team they had established had caused many hegemonic powers to suffer major losses. Bloody Poem had even managed to defeat Heaven's Brilliance, a top-tier hegemonic power, in a frontal confrontation. Bloody Poem only had 10,000 members fighting against Heaven's Brilliance's army of millions during that confrontation. Heaven's Brilliance had even sent as many as 100 Tier 6 God-ranked experts to deal with Bloody Poem. Yet, Bloody Poem had successfully defended its city and killed all 100 of Heaven's Brilliance's God-ranked experts. Because of this miraculous outcome, the battle was remembered as one of the legendary battles in the Greater God's domain. Meanwhile, a large part of Bloody Poem's success in that battle was due to Wordless Ember and Sleeping Quicksand. The two of them had stopped the majority of Heaven's Brilliance's God-ranked experts by themselves. Because of their outstanding performance, Wordless Ember became known as one of the 10 great sword gods in the Greater God's domain, while Sleeping Quicksand became known as one of the 10 great oracles. The Seven Luminaries Alliance, the oldest neutral power in the Greater God's domain, had even conferred the title of Saintess to Sleeping Quicksand. The Seven Luminaries Alliance was one of the strongest powers in the Greater God's domain. Its hands reached across the entire Greater God's domain, and the organization's main purpose was to evaluate Tier 6 God-ranked experts. Moreover, any Tier 6 God-ranked expert could join the organization, regardless of whether they were a member of another power or not. In addition to having no restrictions placed on them, Tier 6 God-ranked experts who joined the Seven Luminaries Alliance would also be given the position of Elder as soon as they joined. The people who held the most authority in the Seven Luminaries Alliance were the Senate's 12 Grand Elders and the Tier 6 God-ranked experts who had been conferred titles by the Seven Luminaries Alliance. However, receiving a title from the Seven Luminaries Alliance was an incredibly challenging task, and the Alliance had given out titles to no more than 10 God-ranked experts in the last century. Yet, Sleeping Quicksand managed to not only receive a title from the Seven Luminaries Alliance, but also became the youngest God-ranked expert to receive a title from the Alliance. After the rise of Wordless Ember and Sleeping Quicksand, others quickly found out that they originated from a stratified abyssal realm. Meanwhile, after the various powers investigated this stratified abyssal realm, they quickly discovered that it used to be a nation inhabited by ancient god. According to rumors, Sleeping Quicksand had acquired an incredibly powerful ancient god's legacy during her time in this stratified abyssal realm. Hence, the Seven Luminaries Alliance had conferred her the title of Saintess. While Shifeng and the others were spectating the battle, the two teams fighting in the distance quickly noticed their presence as well. "Friends over there, do you mind lending us a hand? Our purple light trading firm will repay you generously afterward," a middle-aged man defending the caravan shouted when he saw Shifeng's team. Meanwhile, as soon as the middle-aged man finished speaking, a fierce man from the team trying to plunder the caravan shouted, "A measly team of 20 dares spectate Death Curse's operation? You people must be tired of living. This novel is _hosted_ by hosted novel." As soon as the fierce man finished speaking, the plundering side's advanced combat puppet promptly turned toward Shifeng's team and fired its magic cannon at them. Immediately, a black beam of light tore through space and flew straight toward Shifeng's team. The beam was so quick that it crossed the 1,000-yard distance and enveloped Shifeng's team in the blink of an eye. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3103_Night Revenant is too much. How can he attack those people without even giving them a warning? Is he not afraid that they might be upper-class nobles from Slumber City? Night Revenant is too much. How can he attack those people without even giving them a warning? Is he not afraid that they might be upper-class nobles from Slumber City? It seems that that person from Death Curse has completed the trial. Otherwise, there's no way Death Curse's members would act so arrogantly. But those people are truly unlucky. Even the commander can't get away unscathed from an advanced combat puppet's magic cannon. Those people must have been wiped out already. The expressions of the Purple Light Trading Firm's members turned ugly when they saw the Death Curse Adventurer team's advanced combat puppet suddenly take action against Shifeng's team. Originally, Shifeng's team had been their Purple Light Trading Firm's hope. After all, players who'd appear in this area would typically be from Slumber City. And since Shifeng's team dared to travel outside with so few people, it proved that they were strong. Hence, there was a high chance that this might be a team under the command of one of Slumber City's upper-class nobles. After all, upper-class nobles were a special group of existences out of Slumber City's several 100 million players. They had many followers, and they also enjoyed greater authority in Slumber City. Even Slumber City's various powers would try their best to partner with these upper-class nobles. Meanwhile, if an upper-class noble was willing to pay the price, even the peak powers in Slumber City would get a headache. Typically, only those who had managed to become Slumber City's Vice City Lord would dare to provoke upper-class nobles. However, to become a Vice City Lord, not only would a player need to have 100 Temple Knight players with Tier 4 strength as followers, but they would also need to complete the Temple Trial. For Death Curse, gathering 100 Temple Knights wasn't a difficult task. However, the difficulty of completing the Temple Trial was on an entirely different level. Many experts had challenged the Temple Trial throughout these years. However, only 3 people managed to complete it. These 3 people were essentially invincible existences in Slumber City, and they were also Slumber City's mainstays. The Purple Light trading firm had only managed to gain its current standing and strength in Slumber City because it was backed by one of these 3 people. However, if that person from Death Curse managed to complete the Temple Trial, it'd be a nightmare for the Purple Light trading firm since the 2 organizations were longtime enemies. While the Purple Light trading firm's members were lamenting over the situation, the destructive beam fired by Death Curse's advanced combat puppet didn't hit its mark as intended. Instead, just when it was about to hit Shifeng's team, the beam suddenly got deflected and struck the nearby ground, instantly evaporating the rocks and trees within a 100-yard radius. The magic destruction cannon's beam got deflected. How is this possible? The commander is one of the top 100 knights in Slumber City, but even he can't deflect that powerful beam. Who is that person? The Purple Light trading firm's members couldn't help but be astonished as they looked at the dagger-wielding woman standing before Shifeng's team. The advanced combat puppet's magic destruction cannon was a weapon specifically meant to target Temple Knights since it possessed the power of a Tier 4 spell cast by a Tier 4 mythic monster. Even players with the identity of Temple Knight would die instantly to this attack unless they possessed a life-saving skill. This was also why Knight Revenant had instructed the advanced combat puppet's user to use the magic destruction cannon without hesitation. Even an upper-class noble's team would evaporate under this attack unless the team similarly had an advanced combat puppet to tank the hit. Yet, now, a member of Shifeng's team had managed to deflect the magic destruction cannon's attack with nothing but the tattered dagger in her hand. This was simply unbelievable. At this moment, the Purple Light trading firm's members weren't the only ones surprised by this situation. Even Crimson Heart, Bloodhammer, and the others on Shifeng's team couldn't help but be surprised. Find the original at *hosted novel. If they were back in their homeworlds, they could similarly replicate this feat easily. However, while subjected to the stratified abyssal realm's various penalties, there was no way they could deflect an attack of such caliber. Yet, Hidden Soul had accomplished it. Moreover, she had executed the feat as effortlessly as she was walking. When Maria saw the magic runes on Hidden Soul's body, shock filled her heart as she muttered, "Is she a high demonkin?" "What? She's a high demonkin?" Bloodhammer's eyes widened when he heard Maria's guess. Demonkins were considered an incredibly rare race, and even ordinary demonkins already possessed talent rivaling some of the weaker higher life forms. Meanwhile, high demonkins were a race that was rarer than even demidragons. If demidragons were known for their physical strength and high elves for their magic, then high demonkins were known for their spatial manipulation, which was an incredibly rare ability in God's domain. One could say that high demonkins were the favored child of space. Typically, players would have to master the use of their mana domain and reach the world creation standard before gaining some spatial manipulation capabilities. In other words, players would need to master the power that only an extremely small portion of Tier 5 players could master. However, high demonkins could skip this step entirely. Although their spatial manipulation ability was far from rivaling that of Tier 5 experts who had achieved world creation, it still wasn't something players beneath Tier 5 could come into contact with. Simply put, Under a situation where the difference in strength wasn't particularly big, it'd be incredibly difficult for players to harm a high demonkin. Even touching a high demonkin was a challenging task. These people are likely to be temple knights from another city, Vice Commander. I don't think it'll be wise for us to continue taking action, a level 116 assassin youth wielding a fragmented legendary dagger said, frowning as he looked at Hidden Soul's distant figure. In addition to being an assassin himself, he was also one of the top 100 temple knights in Slumber City. However, even he doubted that he could replicate Hidden Soul's feat. He felt that only temple knights ranked among the top 30 could do so. Meanwhile, every one of Slumber City's top 30 temple knights was a monstrously powerful expert that even Death Curse's commander would have difficulty dealing with. So what if she's strong? Does that make me weak? Knight Revenant said as he looked at the assassin youth contemptuously. Leave those people to me. You guys focus on annihilating Purple Light's members. The assassin youth nodded and stopped speaking. If Slumber City's top 30 temple knights were considered monsters, Knight Revenant was also a monster. Moreover, he was a monster ranked among the top 10 of Slumber City's temple knight ranking list. Knight Revenant was also the biggest reason why Death Curse dared to intercept Purple Light's caravan. Meanwhile, after Knight Revenant issued his command, he promptly dashed toward Shifeng's team, leaving behind after images in his wake. This person must be very strong since he dares come at us alone even after seeing the scene just now, Maria commented as she watched Knight Revenant rapidly approaching them. Judging by his appearance, he should be a tigerkin. This race excels in strength and speed. Magical classes, make sure not to let him get close to you. I'll go and block him. Everyone else, attack him in the meantime. It doesn't matter even if you hit me to attack him, no need. I can handle him by myself, Hidden Soul said, shaking her head before vanishing from her location. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3104 underscore that Tigerkin's strength shouldn't be underestimated, Guild Leader Black Flame. In terms of combat standards, he's most likely a 4th floor expert already, Maria said worriedly to Shifeng when she saw Hidden Soul taking the initiative to meet Knight Revenant in battle. It'll probably be difficult for her to deal with him all by herself. That Tigerkin's strength shouldn't be underestimated, Guild Leader Black Flame. In terms of combat standards, he's most likely a 4th floor expert already, Maria said worriedly to Shifeng when she saw Hidden Soul taking the initiative to meet Knight Revenant in battle. It'll probably be difficult for her to deal with him all by herself. Maria could tell that Hidden Soul possessed extraordinary combat standards. The other party was undoubtedly at the World Tower's 3rd floor standard already. Even Maria wasn't confident that she could win against Hidden Soul. However, it was also apparent that Knight Revenant was superior to Hidden Soul when it came to combat standards. Moreover, Knight Revenant was a native of the stratified abyssal realm, so he should have long since adapted to the environment here. These two factors would put Hidden Soul at a considerable disadvantage. Crimson Heart also nodded in agreement with Maria's words. This was their first day in the stratified abyssal realm, so it'd be wiser if they moved carefully. Regaining the levels they lost from death might not be a problem, but it'd be extremely challenging to recover any weapons or equipment they lost. Since Knight Revenant was charging at them all by himself, the wiser decision to make would be to focus their firepower and dispose of him first. She'll be enough, Shifeng calmly said. Rather than interfere with her fight, we should first focus on helping the Purple Light trading firm. It's obvious that Purple Light's members can't hold out for much longer. If we wait until Death Curse's side takes care of Purple Light's members, Death Curse will have a much easier time dealing with us. Even Shifeng lacked the strength to go up against hundreds of experts all by himself in the stratified abyssal realm. If Hidden Soul could keep Death Curse's strongest expert busy all by herself, it would save them a lot of energy. However, if they were to commit their entire team to deal with one person, the situation would quickly turn disadvantageous for them. Maria, Crimson Heart, and the others quickly came to a realization when they heard Shifeng's words. Immediately, they followed Shifeng to reinforce Purple Light's members. Their team of 20 might be able to kill Knight Revenant if they worked together. However, by the time they killed Knight Revenant, Purple Light's members would have most likely been annihilated already. At that time, they'd have to face Death Curse's several hundred members all by themselves, and they'd become the ones to die next. They didn't fall for it. While exchanging blows with Hidden Soul, Night Revenant couldn't help but be surprised when he saw Shifeng and the others bypassing them and advancing toward the distant battlefield. Your leader is smart to send you, his team's strongest member, to keep me busy while he and the rest of his team deal with the others. Night Revenant was not only in possession of 2 fragmented legendary items, but he also possessed the hidden class Soulwalker. He could last a long time even if he had to go against over a dozen Temple Knights simultaneously. Moreover, there was also 0 chance of these Temple Knights killing him. Hence, the best decision for Shifeng's team would be to prioritize the other experts of Death Curse. It was also a wise decision for Shifeng's team to send their High Demonkin to keep him busy. Honestly, even Night Revenant found it tricky to deal with Hidden Soul. High Demonkins were famed for being sticky and slippery opponents. This was especially true when a skilled expert like Hidden Soul played this race. Even after trading several dozen blows with Hidden Soul, Night Revenant had not landed even a single attack on the other party. Whenever his attacks were about to land on Hidden Soul, his weapons would simply pass through her body as if it were an illusion. Yet, he was also certain that he wasn't fighting an illusion since Hidden Soul's retaliation was very much real. Under such a situation, Night Revenant couldn't chase after Shifeng and the others even if he wanted to. However, when Night Revenant saw Shifeng and the others reaching the other battlefield, he suddenly smiled and said, "It's a pity all of your actions are futile." As soon as Night Revenant finished speaking, another metal giant measuring over a dozen meters in height suddenly appeared among Death Curse's team. This metal giant was Death Curse's second advanced combat puppet, and it had promptly swung its massive saber at Shifeng's team as soon as it appeared. Meanwhile, in addition to carrying power at the Tier 4 standard, the advanced combat puppet's attack was also enhanced by Mountain Splitter, a bronze combat technique. Setting range aside, the raw power of this attack was superior to even the advanced combat puppet's magic destruction cannon. Even a mythic monster would fall into a weakened state if it got hit by this attack. There was no way players could defend against it at all. Impossible. A second advanced combat puppet? The expressions of Purple Light's members turned incredibly ugly when they saw a second advanced combat puppet appearing among Death Curse's team. It was especially true for Wordless Ember, Sleeping Quicksand, and the middle-aged man leading the team. Advanced combat puppets were an extremely rare commodity in Slumber City. Normally, they would only be used to defend strategic locations such as mines. They were also incredibly useful against monster armies. Even the Purple Light trading firm, as powerful as it was, only had 5 advanced combat puppets in its possession. If it weren't for the importance of the cargo they were transporting this time, they would have never been willing to assign an advanced combat puppet to defend their caravan. After all, using it for caravan protection meant that one of their strategic resource nodes would have to go without the support of an advanced combat puppet. This would put the resource node at huge risk of being destroyed by monster tides. However, Death Curse only had 4 advanced combat puppets. Yet, the adventurer team had sent 2 to target their caravan. This was simply absurd. At this moment, though, Hidden Soul, who was fighting against Night Revenant, suddenly laughed. "Futile? What did I get wrong?" Night Revenant asked, feeling a little confused when he saw Hidden Soul stop attacking him. "Firstly, I'm not the strongest member of my team," Hidden Soul said. "Secondly, I'm afraid a mere advanced combat puppet is far from enough to stop Guild Leader Black Flame's sword. Not enough to stop his sword." Night Revenant nearly laughed when he heard Hidden Soul's words. An advanced combat puppet could easily block a Temple Knight's attack even without relying on any combat techniques. Meanwhile, an attack from an advanced combat puppet using a bronze combat technique was something even Death Curse's commander would have to avoid. Otherwise, advanced combat puppets wouldn't have become the various powers' most important trump card. However, just when Night Revenant was about to say something, he was interrupted by the abrupt exclamations of his team members on the other battlefield. He blocked it. He blocked the Mountain Splitter. Did he use an invulnerability skill? The eyes of Death Curse's members bulged when they saw Shifeng single-handedly stopping the advanced combat puppet's saber. Moreover, in addition to stopping the weapon that was much bigger than he was, Shifeng had also blocked the advanced combat puppet's attack without moving an inch from his spot or taking a single point of damage. As expected of the nation once inhabited by ancient gods. It's astonishing that the residents here have managed to develop their combat puppet manipulation to such a degree, Shifeng thought, feeling a little surprised when he saw that the saber before him was creating a void in the surrounding space. It was much more challenging for players to manipulate a combat puppet than manipulate their in-game bodies. Even Shifeng would have difficulty executing a bronze combat technique with a combat puppet. Moreover, the advanced combat puppet's attack had already reached the Tier 4 peak standard. If it were before he had converted into an ancient human and obtained the Abyssal Eye, Shifeng wouldn't have been able to divert the attack's power with Sword's transmigration. He would have most likely needed to use one of his trump cards to block the attack. So what if you blocked my attack? I can simply wear you out with the advanced combat puppet's limitless stamina, the middle-aged man manipulating the advanced combat puppet said as he executed Mountain Splitter against Shifeng one more time. Unlike players, combat puppets didn't rely on stamina to operate. So long as they had enough mana, combat puppets could keep on fighting forever. At most, the player manipulating the combat puppet would exhaust some concentration when executing a combat technique with the combat puppet. However, since players didn't have to move inside combat puppets, they recovered concentration much more quickly than if they were fighting themselves. Moreover, advanced combat puppets possessed incredible defensive capabilities, and even an all-out attack from a top 30 Temple Knight would, at most, shave off one durability point. With the advanced combat puppet's 3,000 points of durability, it'd take several thousand attacks from a top 30 Temple Knight to destroy it. A player would probably die from exhaustion if they had to execute several thousand all-out attacks consecutively. This was also why even the various cities' top 100 Temple Knights would choose to flee whenever they came across an advanced combat puppet. However, Shifeng did not try to defend against the advanced combat puppet's attack this time. Instead, he deflected the attack slightly using the Winter of Eternal Night, causing the massive saber to slide to the side. Then, he raised the Winter of Eternal Night with both hands and executed a vertical slash against the metal giant before him. First sword, Light Shadow. Immediately, an illusory great sword appeared in the air and descended on the advanced combat puppet at lightning speed. Then, after the illusory greatsword disappeared, the advanced combat puppet suddenly stopped moving and split in half. As for the Domain Realm expert manipulating the advanced combat puppet, he had converted into particles of light and vanished without a trace. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3105 TL Notes, Purple Light Trading Firm - Purple Light Chamber of Commerce. When Shifeng bisected Death Curse's advanced combat puppet, silence suddenly enveloped the entire battlefield. Even the members of Purple Light and Death Curse had stopped fighting to look at the destroyed combat puppet. It got destroyed. He destroyed it with just one attack. No. Impossible. That's an advanced combat puppet we are talking about. I must be dreaming. How can a player possibly accomplish such a feat? Everyone was greatly shocked by the sight of the bisected advanced combat puppet. Advanced combat puppets were known for being nigh-invincible existences in the stratified abyssal realms' various cities. At the same time, they were the various powers' trump cards. Meanwhile, even the administrators of the various cities would have great difficulty destroying an advanced combat puppet. Yet, now, one of these nigh-invincible existences had failed to survive even one attack from Shifeng and gotten bisected like a piece of tofu. Could that person be a Tier 4 NPC in disguise? Wordless Ember muttered, his eyes filled with disbelief as he looked at Shifeng. When it came to being a swordsman, Wordless Ember felt that he could easily rank within the top 5 of Slumber City. Meanwhile, the only swordsman who could achieve a convincing victory against him in Slumber City was the Purple Light Chamber of Commerce's backer, Laura Crader. However, Wordless Ember was certain that the destructive power Shafong had just exhibited was something even shimmering sword Laura Crader could not accomplish. Yet, it should be known that Laura Crader was the closest person to becoming a limit breaker in Slumber City. It might make sense if Shafong was a limit breaker, since it was rumored that limit breakers could destroy advanced combat puppets in one hit. However, Shafong couldn't be a limit breaker. After all, once a player became a limit breaker, they could only remain in the stratified abyssal realm for a short time before having to leave for a higher world. So, if Shafong wasn't a limit breaker, the only plausible explanation for his unbelievable strength was that he wasn't a player but a Tier 4 NPC instead. No, it should be his sword. When he attacked just now, I could feel the power gathered within his sword reaching the limit breaker standard, Sleeping Quicksand said, shaking her head as she observed Shafong. The sword he wields is most likely extraordinary even among fragmented legendary weapons. In addition, he also has extraordinary combat standards. I believe he should be able to rival those administrators. The administrators? When Wordless Ember heard Sleeping Quicksand's evaluation, his fighting spirit promptly flared up. Slumber City might have a player population of several 100 million. Still, the number of swordsmen who could spar with him numbered only a handful, let alone swordsmen who could match the city's administrators. If he could engage in an all-out fight with Shafong, he was certain that it would greatly help his swordsmanship. Meanwhile, when Shafong defeated the advanced combat puppet, Crimson Heart, Bloodhammer, Gentle Snow, and the others who followed him also couldn't help but be shocked. They had long since known that Shafong possessed astounding strength. After all, he had managed to single-handedly tank the Tier 4 Dark Titan. However, that raid had taken place in God's domain, where they didn't have to suffer the stratified abyssal realm's severe penalties. Moreover, Shafong had used all of his strength to tank the Dark Titan back then. However, they couldn't help but feel that rather than grow weaker, Shafong had grown stronger after entering the stratified abyssal realm instead. That person is too dangerous, Commander. We might also lose the other advanced combat puppet if we keep on fighting. Should we continue? A berserker clashing against Echoing Judgment, Purple Light's commander, asked through the team chat urgently. Retreat. Night Revenant commanded without hesitation, his eyes filled with shock as he looked at Shafong. Then, a cold glint flashed in his eyes as he swore, "We'll pay him back for this in Slumber City sooner or later." Night Revenant never expected to encounter an existence rivaling Slumber City's administrators in a 20-man team. He also didn't expect to lose an advanced combat puppet. If news of this spread, Death Curse would definitely suffer a huge loss in reputation. After saying so, Night Revenant promptly disappeared into his shadow, preventing Hidden Soul from perceiving his movement and presence. He left. Just like that. Hidden Soul grew a little disappointed when she saw Night Revenant and the other members of Death Curse retreating. I might have been able to achieve a breakthrough in that silver footwork if I could clash with him a little longer. Hidden Soul had gained a significant harvest from fighting with Night Revenant. Particularly, the evasive techniques Night Revenant employed was undoubtedly the strangest out of all evasive techniques she had seen used by assassins. If it weren't for her talent as a high demonkin, she would have likely been led astray by Night Revenant's movements and gotten hit on numerous occasions. Meanwhile, after Death Curse's members swiftly withdrew from the battlefield, Purple Light's members couldn't help but sigh in relief. The size of Death Curse's team exceeded their team by more than 2 times. They had also fought many battles against monsters before Death Curse had ambushed them, so they didn't have much stamina remaining. Had the fight with Death Curse continued for a few more minutes, they would have most certainly suffered annihilation. Thank you for your assistance. If not for you all, our entire team would have died here, Echoing Judgment said gratefully after approaching Shafong quickly. My name is Echoing Judgment, the Purple Light Chamber of Commerce's commander. May I know how I should address you all? Black Flame, Shafong answered without hesitation. Everyone else in Shafong's team also introduced themselves one after another. It seems you all possess extraordinary skills if you can operate outside with so few people. Could you all be from the Dark Sanctuary? Echoing Judgment asked somewhat excitedly when he saw that there were players with higher races, such as Hidden Soul and Maria, in Shafong's team. Support us at H+stead novel. Typically, players in the stratified abyssal realm would operate in teams of 200 at the very least for the sake of survival. If a team operated with only 20 members, the team either had an upper-class noble or was made up of overconfident players. In the latter case, they were usually ignorant newcomers who were setting foot into level 100+ maps for the first time. Aside from these two scenarios, there was also one more possibility for a small team of 20 to appear in a level 100+ map. These players were from the Dark Sanctuary, the center of the stratified abyssal realm. It was rumored that the Dark Sanctuary possessed the secret for players to become limit breakers. However, the Dark Sanctuary was isolated from the rest of the stratified abyssal realm, and it was incredibly challenging to get into and out of the Dark Sanctuary. Players seeking to get out of the Dark Sanctuary needed to complete a trial with a participation limit of 20 players per team. Meanwhile, each trial completion would only grant players one exit opportunity. Moreover, teams that sought to leave the Dark Sanctuary could only spend a limited time outside the Dark Sanctuary. For outsiders seeking to enter the Dark Sanctuary, the conditions they needed to meet were even stricter. Not only did they have to complete a trial, but they also needed to find trial certificates before they could even qualify to challenge the trial. Trial certificates dropped randomly in the stratified abyssal realm's level 100+ maps, and only after gathering 20 certificates could players challenge the Dark Sanctuary's entry trial. The various cities' peak powers all sought to enter the Dark Sanctuary and search for the secret to becoming a limit breaker. Unfortunately, even until now, not even one of Slumber City's powers had managed to gather 20 certificates. In fact, there weren't even 20 certificates in total in the entire city. On the other hand, though, there were some players who had managed to come out of the Dark Sanctuary. These were all players belonging to the Dark Sanctuary's various powers, and every one of these players was incredibly powerful. These players had specifically left the Dark Sanctuary to trade with powers outside the Dark Sanctuary, and many powers had skyrocketed in strength because of their trades with the Dark Sanctuary's players. Meanwhile, one of the easiest ways to identify whether a team was from the Dark Sanctuary was by looking at the number of higher races the team had. Higher races were incredibly rare in the various cities. They were so rare that there wouldn't be more than a handful of higher races in a city of several hundred million. Yet, Shifeng's small team of 20 had 2 higher races. Moreover, one of them was a high demonkin, and the other was a demidragon. Both were extremely powerful races, even among higher races. There was no way any city outside of the Dark Sanctuary could come up with a team with 2 of these higher races. Thus, the only explanation was that Shifeng's team came from the Dark Sanctuary. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3106 As soon as Echoing Judgment finished asking his question, the other Purple Light members promptly looked at Shifeng's team, their eyes filled with excitement and desire. Even Wordless Ember and Sleeping Quicksand wore looks of interest on their faces. Meanwhile, Shifeng and the others couldn't help but be surprised and confused by this situation. As soon as Echoing Judgment finished asking his question, the other Purple Light members promptly looked at Shifeng's team, their eyes filled with excitement and desire. Even Wordless Ember and Sleeping Quicksand wore looks of interest on their faces. Meanwhile, Shifeng and the others couldn't help but be surprised and confused by this situation. "Are you perhaps not from the Dark Sanctuary?" Echoing Judgment asked, feeling a little confused when he saw Shifeng's team remaining silent. Although the levels of Shifeng's team members were somewhat low, this was a normal situation in the stratified abyssal realm. After all, it was incredibly easy for players to meet death out in the fields. Moreover, leveling up became absurdly challenging after level 110, each subsequent level up requiring several times the EXP of the previous level up. Depending on a player's class, the increase in EXP requirement could even reach tenfold. Yet, each death would cost players to lose one entire level. Meanwhile, if Shifeng's team truly came from the Dark Sanctuary, it was completely normal for them to suffer multiple deaths in their process of completing the exit trial. So, it was understandable that their levels were so low. However, if Shifeng's team wasn't from the Dark Sanctuary, It'd be strange why they were so low-leveled despite having such great strength. You've guessed correctly. We are indeed from the Dark Sanctuary, Shifeng said without breaking his composure even in the slightest. We had to go through a lot of trouble to come out here, and our goal this time is to find some long-term partners. Shifeng had heard about the Dark Sanctuary located in the stratified abyssal realm inhabited by ancient gods. He even knew about some of the Dark Sanctuary's secrets. Although he could also lie that they were players from another city, they didn't have much knowledge regarding the stratified abyssal realm's current state of affairs. If they pretended to be from another city, their act would get exposed very easily. Of course, there was also the option of being truthful and saying they came from outside the stratified abyssal realm. However, if they did that, it would put them in a passive state. This was because the stratified abyssal realm's native players knew that players from outside the stratified abyssal realm were pushovers. Regardless of how powerful an organization these outsiders came from, none of these outside organizations could set foot into the stratified abyssal realm. Moreover, native players also knew that outsiders needed to go through a lot of trouble to enter the stratified abyssal realm. This meant that outsiders didn't really have much to offer. To make matters worse, many outside powers had access to the stratified abyssal realm. It was just that each power could only send a very small number of players into the stratified abyssal realm. This meant that native powers would have no lack of outside powers to partner with. So, the native powers would typically squeeze outside powers for everything they've got. However, it was a different story for the Dark Sanctuary. The Dark Sanctuary was located in the stratified abyssal realm, and it was a place countless players in the stratified abyssal realm sought to enter. It was just that the various powers were currently stuck outside the Dark Sanctuary. Even so, it was only a matter of time before the various powers got into the Dark Sanctuary. Meanwhile, to ensure their entry into the Dark Sanctuary went smoothly, the various powers based outside the Dark Sanctuary strongly revered and desired to partner with the Dark Sanctuary's local powers. When Crimson Heart, Bloodhammer, and the others heard Shifeng's words, they couldn't help but look at him in astonishment. They didn't think that Shifeng would dare tell such a lie. Was he not afraid of getting exposed? However, Echoing Judgment and the other Purple Light members simply took Shifeng's words at face value. It's no wonder he can exhibit destructive power rivaling limit breakers. The Dark Sanctuary truly is an extraordinary place. I wonder when we'll be able to gather 20 certificates. Wordless Ember thought to himself in excitement. It was the dream of every player in the stratified abyssal realm to become a limit breaker and leave this world. After all, only by becoming a limit breaker could they reach the rumored place in the real world, acquire much longer lifespans and youth, obtain their own city, and set foot into the true upper world. They wouldn't have to constantly worry about living space and food like they were now. You're finding partners? Echoing Judgment's smile grew even brighter when he heard Shifeng's words. May I know if you are willing to partner with the Purple Light Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Blackflame? We are willing to show you our absolute sincerity. Partner with you? Shifeng simply revealed a faint smile as he looked at Echoing Judgment. May I know what you can offer us? You should know that there aren't many things that aren't available in the Dark Sanctuary. Yes, I am aware of that. However, Slumber City's local specialty, the hypersensitivity potion, is unique in the entire stratified abyssal realm. I'm certain this thing will be of great help to you, Echoing Judgment said, smiling as he took out 20 dark blue potions and handed them to Shifeng. You can check the description yourself if you don't believe me. You can also take these 20 hypersensitivity potions as thanks for helping us. Commander, aren't you giving away too many? Wordless Ember whispered to Echoing Judgment. The hypersensitivity potion was Slumber City's local specialty. Not only could it double players' EXP gain, but it could also put players into a hypersensitive state. When training under the hypersensitive state, players could achieve improvements much more quickly than usual. Moreover, the potion lasted 12 hours and a cooldown of only 2 natural days. The hypersensitivity potion was also the main reason Slumber City's experts were stronger and more numerous than most other cities. However, the hypersensitivity potion had an incredibly low production volume, so even powers based in Slumber City could only acquire a very small amount. Meanwhile, Purple Light could only obtain around 100 bottles each month. No, this is Purple Light's show of sincerity. Moreover, it is thanks to Mr. Black Flame's team that we managed to protect our dark crystals, Echoing Judgment said. Their caravan carried the dark crystals they had gone through great lengths to acquire from several cities. Meanwhile, these dark crystals would allow the Purple Light Chamber of Commerce to elevate its contribution in Slumber City to the next level. Compared to the benefits they stood to gain from these dark crystals, 20 hypersensitivity potions was a small price to pay. Afterward, Echoing Judgment looked toward Shifeng and asked, "May I know if you are interested in this hypersensitivity potion, Mr. Black Flame?" Meanwhile, after Shifeng and the others were done reading the hypersensitivity potion's introduction, their hearts pounded rapidly. They never thought they would come across such a godly item in the stratified abyssal realm. There was no power in God's domain that would complain about having too many experts. It was especially true for experts at the Void Realm standard or above. Although there were many external items in God's domain that could be used to nurture experts, few could match the hypersensitivity potion in terms of efficiency. If they could purchase the hypersensitivity potion in large quantities, the benefits they could gain would be no less than if they managed to recruit the stratified abyssal realms experts into their respective guilds. "We'd be lying if we said we weren't interested in this potion," Shifeng said as he put the hypersensitivity potions into his bag. Then, he looked toward Echoing Judgment and asked, "But how does Purple Light plan on trading this potion? Also, how many can you supply? Judging by this item's efficacy, it should be quite difficult to obtain it, right? I'm guessing that its supply should also be very limited. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3107 When Shifeng finished speaking, Crimson Heart and Bloodhammer promptly turned to Echoing Judgment. When Shifeng finished speaking, Crimson Heart and Bloodhammer promptly turned to Echoing Judgment. While they didn't know to what extent the hypersensitivity potion could affect players, everything was just like Shifeng said. It was unlikely that an item as precious as the hypersensitivity potion could be produced in large quantities. Naturally, the amount Purple Light would be willing to trade would be even fewer. If Purple Light only offered to trade a few dozen bottles, such a small amount wouldn't mean much to them. You can rest assured of the hypersensitivity potion's volume. Purple Light has many connections in Slumber City, Echoing Judgment said with a faint smile. So long as the price is right, obtaining even 1,000 bottles wouldn't be a problem for Purple Light. Even 1,000 bottles won't be a problem? Shifeng was slightly surprised by Echoing Judgment's claim. At the same time, a look of interest appeared on his face. "May I know how much you plan to sell these hypersensitivity potions for?" If he could get his hands on 1,000 hypersensitivity potions, Zero Wing's main force could achieve significant growth within a short period. This would greatly help in Zero Wing's development. A guild's promotion was closely tied to team dungeons in God's domain. This was because guild promotion orders were mainly found in high-difficulty team dungeons. So, if a guild sought to raise its rank, it would need to have a sufficiently strong main force. The strength of the guild's main force was especially important for a cross-border guild. Unlike the standard guild promotion process, cross-border guilds didn't only require guild promotion orders to get promoted. A cross-border guild also needed to pass the Adventurers Association's strength evaluation. Different from the guild ranking system adopted by the various gods' domain, the Greater Gods Domain's guild ranking system separated guilds into common, bronze, silver, and gold ranks. Meanwhile, to get from a common guild to a bronze guild, a guild would need to have 100 experts who have reached the World Tower's second floor. In other words, a guild would need to have 100 Void Realm experts to qualify to become a bronze guild. In Shifeng's homeworld, this was a requirement that only a portion of superpowers could fulfill. Meanwhile, the difference between the benefits a common cross-border guild and a bronze cross-border guild enjoyed was massive. This was because guilds could only establish branch guilds and guild settlements in the various cross-border regions after becoming a bronze cross-border guild. This was also why, once a god's domain gained access to the greater god's domain, the gap between superpowers and non-superpowers would only grow larger and larger. 30 dark crystals per bottle or 1 Tier 3 dark skill book for 5 bottles. We won't add in any additional charges. We only hope to maintain a long-term partnership with you, Mr. Black Flame, Echoing Judgment said sincerely. Of course, you can also provide us with upper-class nobles as offerings. We can offer you 30 hypersensitivity potions per upper-class noble. You won't find a better price than this in Slumber City. Wordless Ember and Sleeping Quicksand were rendered speechless when they heard Echoing Judgment's offer. Like Echoing Judgment said, the Purple Light Chamber of Commerce truly wouldn't be earning any profit from this transaction. They were doing it solely to befriend Shifeng's team. Upper-class nobles as offerings? Shifeng nodded after hearing Echoing Judgment's words. Okay. We'll think about it. Shifeng knew about the dark crystal Echoing Judgment mentioned. It was something similar to the 7 Luminaries crystal in that it contained energy of high purity. However, unlike 7 Luminaries crystals, dark crystals only contained dark energy. In terms of value, the dark crystal was much more valuable than the 7 Luminaries crystal. This was because dark crystals were much rarer in both the various gods' domain and the greater gods' domain. It was one of the precious resources that were highly contested among the various powers. If Shifeng wanted to acquire dark crystals, he could only do so through the stratified abyssal realm. The difficulty of obtaining dark crystals from outside the stratified abyssal realm would only increase and not decrease. As for Tier 3 dark skill books, while obtaining them wasn't difficult, he would need to make a trip back to God's domain, which evidently wasn't possible right now. Thus, the only way Shifeng could acquire a large number of hypersensitivity potions was most likely through the upper-class nobles Echoing Judgment mentioned. Only, he lacked information on upper-class nobles. He couldn't ask about upper-class nobles, either, since doing so would most likely expose his lie about being a player from the Dark Sanctuary. Crimson Heart and Bloodhammer also remained silent as they looked at Echoing Judgment. They both understood that they would have to first enter Slumber City and learn more about the stratified abyssal realm before they could start trading with the Purple Light Chamber of Commerce. Oh, right. Please take these. These emblems prove that you are Purple Light's VIP customers, Echoing Judgment said as he took out 20 light purple, diamond-shaped emblems and handed them to Shifeng. This must be your first time leaving the Dark Sanctuary. After entering the stratified abyssal realm's level 100+ maps, you'll first have to pass the Abyssal Tower's strength test if you want to live in an NPC city. Your test results will determine the status you gain in the city, and the level of authority you enjoy will also change with this status. You'll need to gain a civilian status before you are allowed to live in the city. Otherwise, you'll be driven out without question. You have caused Death Curse to suffer significant losses this time, so I'm afraid you'll come into some trouble in Slumber City. However, with Purple Light's VIP customer certification, you can take the Abyssal Tower's test once without paying any city contribution points. So long as you manage to gain a noble status in Slumber City, Death Curse will have difficulty troubling you in the city. If you manage to become upper-class nobles, Death Curse won't dare to recklessly take action against you. Thank you, Shifeng said, smiling as he accepted the 20 emblems. Although they had ended up offending Slumber City's Death Curse adventurer team for helping the Purple Light Chamber of Commerce, they had managed to save plenty of trouble thanks to Purple Light. They had even learned about the hypersensitivity potion and a few other important pieces of information. Overall, this was a worthwhile transaction. We are only repaying the favor you've done for us, Echoing Judgment said, shaking his head. It is also because of us that you've ended up offending Death Curse. After Shifeng exchanged a few more pleasantries with Echoing Judgment, he distributed Purple Light's VIP customer certifications and the hypersensitivity potions to his teammates. Then, under Echoing Judgment's invitation, their team followed Purple Light to Slumber City. Stratified Abyssal Realm, Slumber City. On the main street where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold, there sat a battle arena that had over 20 floors and occupied an area the size of a sports stadium. Currently, inside one of the battle arena's combat rooms, over a dozen level 115+ experts wearing the Temple Knight emblem laid flat on the ground around a level 118 middle-aged man wielding 2 great swords. Interesting. He managed to not only scare off Knight Revenant but also destroy an advanced combat puppet in one hit. The middle-aged man smiled when he read the message he had just received. This level of destructive power is already enough to put him in the top 5 of Slumber City. It's already been 2 years since the top 5 ranks in Slumber City have changed owners. I wonder who is stronger between him and me and Death Curse's solitary soul? Is there even a need to guess? You're definitely the stronger one, Boss Wolf. With the legacy you obtained, the Shimmering Sword is probably the only person in Slumber City who can match you now, a level 116 young man said reverentially as he sat up from the ground and looked at the middle-aged man named Wolf Emperor. The 5 experts occupying the top 5 ranks of Slumber City's Temple Knight ranking list currently were the city's 3 administrators, Death Curse's commander Solitary Soul, and Wolf Emperor. Out of these 5 experts, Wolf Emperor was the only person who had climbed to this position without establishing his own organization or relying on others. Search H0 stead N0 vel for the original. Because of this, Wolf Emperor had many admirers and followers in Slumber City. That's not necessarily true, Wolf Emperor said, shaking his head. Solitary Soul has already completed the temple trial, and he should have gained a significant harvest. Even I have no idea how strong he has become already. The level 116 youth didn't say anything. He simply thought that Wolf Emperor was being too humble. After all, Wolf Emperor had already converted to a higher race, and his strength could no longer be compared to the past. At this time, the youth suddenly received a message. Then, after reading the message, he quickly said, "Boss, a friend of mine from Death Curse just messaged me. The group of people who defeated Death Curse has already arrived in Slumber City, and Death Curse's 3 vice-commanders have already gone to meet them. It seems that they plan to get rid of these people to restore their reputation. Death Curse has always been overbearing, so it's not surprising that they're making a move, especially not after Solitary Soul's recent achievement. But are those 3 planning to act together?" Wolf Emperor grew a little interested when he heard about Death Curse's actions. "Let's go. We're going to take a look as well. Those 3 have never acted together aside from when they tried to stop the Shimmering Sword. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3108_Slumber City, Central District. Slumber City, Central District. This city is simply astounding. There are refinement realm experts and above walking around everywhere. The shops here are even selling Hall of Fame level epic equipment. The powers back home will probably lose their minds if they find out about this, Su Qianliu muttered as she looked at the players and shops around her. "Probably. More like definitely," Lin Yaoyu said with a bitter smile. "I can already feel myself on the verge of a mental breakdown." Lin Yaoyu thought that she had already raised her evaluation of the stratified abyssal realm to a sufficiently great extent after watching the battle between Purple Light and Death Curse. However, after arriving in Slumber City, she quickly realized that she had still underestimated how wide of a gap there existed between their homeworld and the stratified abyssal realm. In their homeworld, refinement realm experts would be treated as a mid-level mainstay at the very least if they joined a first-rate guild. Refinement realm experts were so rare that Mysterious Moon didn't have more than 1,000 such experts under its command. Yet, Lin Yaoyu could spot well over 1,000 refinement realm experts just by glancing at the street in front of her. The rarity of Hall of Fame level epic weapons and equipment was even greater. Even first-rate guilds would only have a very small number of such items. Yet, these items were being sold in almost every shop present on Slumber City's main street. Although these items were being sold for demon coins, which was the stratified abyssal realm's main currency, rather than normal coins used in God's domain, the procurement rates of both currencies shouldn't be all too different. Meanwhile, Hall of Fame level epic weapons could easily go for 5,000 or 6,000 coins if sold in the miniature ancient world. Yet, in Slumber City, these same weapons only cost around 500 or 600 demon coins to purchase. Hall of Fame level epic equipment was even cheaper, each piece selling for a little over 100 demon coins only. After arriving in Slumber City, Lin Yaoyu suddenly realized that Mysterious Moon, a high and mighty top-tier first-rate guild, wasn't so high and mighty as she thought. In fact, she couldn't help but doubt whether their homeworld's top-tier first-rate guilds could match the average adventurer team here in strength. According to the information they've learned from Purple Light, the minimum requirement to establish an adventurer team in Slumber City was to have at least 3 Novice Temple Knights. Meanwhile, Novice Temple Knights were typically Void Realm experts or above. Moreover, the minimum requirement to join most adventurer teams was to be at the Refinement Realm standard. At this moment, Lin Yaoyu couldn't even match a Novice Temple Knight in combat standards. Yet, there were well over 10,000 adventurer teams in Slumber City. You don't have to feel dejected, Shifeng said as he looked at Su Qianliu and Lin Yaoyu. This stratified abyssal realm has existed for at least 40 years already. In a situation where their levels and tiers are being heavily restricted, the only way the players here can grow stronger is by developing their technical skills. In this respect, they are vastly superior to even the super guilds in our God's domain. If you were to experience the same restrictions they face for multiple years, your combat standards wouldn't be any weaker than theirs. Their God's domain had only launched 10 years ago. 10 years might seem like a long time, but it was nothing compared to other God's domains. Their God's domain was no different than an infant compared to some of the older God's domains. The stratified abyssal realm they were currently in had already existed for over 40 years. This meant that this stratified abyssal realm was over 30 years ahead of their God's domain in terms of development. This point alone was enough to give the native players here a massive advantage over the players in their God's domain. The abyssal tower is just ahead, Mr. Black Flame. We should hurry over there quickly, Echoing Judgment hurriedly said as he pointed at an ancient tower some distance ahead. I just received a report saying that Death Curse's 3 vice commanders and their subordinates are swiftly making their way to us. You and your team members still do not have official status in Slumber City, while Death Curse's vice commanders and their subordinates are all nobles in Slumber City. They can take direct action against you without having to suffer sanctions from the NPCs. Conversely, if you retaliate against them, the NPCs will take action against you. Okay, Shifeng said, nodding. Understanding that they were in a rush for time, he quickly led his team toward the abyssal tower, which measured several hundred meters in height. In the stratified abyssal realm's NPC cities, NPC guards were essentially invincible existences. This was because even the weakest among them were level 130, Tier 4 NPCs. In contrast, players here couldn't go beyond level 120, Tier 3. Thus, so long as the NPC guards took action, any player they targeted would almost certainly die. If players wished to live safely in Slumber City, they would have to obtain a civilian status first and foremost. With this status, so long as they weren't the ones picking a fight, even players with the noble status could do nothing against them. Shortly after Shifeng and the others entered the abyssal tower and registered for the tower's test, a group of players wearing Death Curse's emblem arrived in the tower's lobby. Meanwhile, the arrival of these players instantly created a commotion in the lobby. It seems you've moved quite quickly, Judgment. Night Revenant said to Echoing Judgment when he failed to see Shifeng's team in the lobby. Then, wearing a sneer, he continued, it's a pity that your actions are futile. Now that the commander has become a vice city lord in Slumber City, it doesn't matter even if they become nobles. A vice city lord still has the authority to banish them from the city for some time. All they're doing now is delaying the inevitable. Solitary Soul succeeded. Echoing Judgment's expression turned a little ugly when he heard Night Revenant's words. Echoing Judgment had heard that Solitary Soul, Death Curse's commander, had entered the temple and challenged the temple trial a few days ago. However, the temple trial was incredibly challenging, so much so that only 3 people have managed to pass it thus far. While Solitary Soul was talented, it shouldn't be so easy for him to cross the final hurdle. Not to mention, Solitary Soul had failed the trial only 2 months ago. In Echoing Judgment's opinion, there was no way Solitary Soul could make much progress in just 2 short months. So, it should be highly unlikely that Solitary Soul could clear the temple trial. However, Echoing Judgment had guessed wrongly, which was terrible news for them. With the authority of a vice city lord, Solitary Soul could easily banish players with the noble and civilian status from the city for a certain period. Although he could only banish a certain number of players each month, he'd have no problem targeting 20 players. That's right. The commander has already succeeded. We are only here to keep an eye on those people, Night Revenant said with a faint smile. Those outsiders will quickly learn how foolish it is to help Purple Light in Slumber City. Crazy bastards. Echoing Judgment realized that Death Curse was serious about taking action when he saw that more and more Death Curse members were gathering in the lobby. Immediately, he turned to Sleeping Quicksand and said, "Quicksand, take a team to the corroded ruins right away. Commander Laura has been grinding there throughout this period, but communication is prevented there. I need you to look for her and figure out a way to invite her back. So long as Commander Laura can come back before the test ends, Solitary Soul won't dare to recklessly take action." Understood. Sleeping Quicksand nodded and quickly left the Abyssal Tower with a small team. Their Chamber of Commerce was looking to partner with Shifeng's team. If Shifeng's team ended up suffering Death Curse's crazed retaliation because of Purple Light would become a laughingstock in Slumber City in the future. Abyssal Tower, trial space. While the situation in the lobby was getting heated, Shifeng wore a shocked and confused expression after entering the trial space. This was because a series of system notifications had rang in his ears as soon as he entered the trial space. System, you have entered the trial space. You have 1 natural day to challenge the trial. You will be rewarded based on the floor you reach. You cannot leave the trial space regardless of whether you die or not. However, you are allowed to log off and rest during this time. System, it is detected that your mana body is at the legendary rank. You have fulfilled the conditions set by the ancient Abyssal God. Do you wish to challenge the Abyssal Trial to acquire the ancient Abyssal God's legacy? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 181, Mana Suppression. Chapter 181, Mana Suppression, the Ancient Abyssal God's Legacy. The unexpected system notification surprised Shifeng. The Ancient Abyssal God was rumored to be the Abyss's creator and one of the oldest ancient gods. Although the Ancient Abyssal God had suddenly disappeared for some unknown reason, some of the power the ancient god had left behind had sparked massive wars in the Greater God's domain. Some hegemonic powers had even vanished from the Greater God's domain because of these wars. However, rumors also mentioned that the ancient Abyssal God did not leave any legacies behind due to his abrupt disappearance. It was even rumored that the Abyss was only half completed when the ancient Abyssal God disappeared. However, even if it was incomplete, the Abyss still had the strength to clash with the Greater God's domain. Shifeng found it hard to believe that the missing ancient Abyssal God had actually left one of his legacies in the stratified Abyssal realm. Even though the legacy had an extremely stringent activation condition, it was still unbelievable nonetheless. However, it was also understandable that this legacy had remained undiscovered until now. After all, it was incredibly hard to obtain a legendary mana body, so much so that one couldn't necessarily find even one player with a legendary mana body in an isolated god's domain. The chances of a player obtaining a legendary mana body in the stratified Abyssal realm, a place that was severely lacking in legacies and imposed many restrictions on its players, were even lower. The stratified Abyssal realm's players might have very high combat standards, but they were inferior to the players in Shifeng's homeworld when it came to mana bodies. Even powerful experts like Echoing Judgment and Sleeping Quicksand only had gold mana bodies, while most other experts in Purple Light only had silver mana bodies. None of them even had an epic mana body, let alone a legendary mana body. System, you have 1 minute to decide whether to accept the Abyssal Trial. If you fail to decide, you will be given the standard trial by default. Upon hearing this new system notification, Shifeng dared not hesitate for even a moment longer as he promptly said, yes. Legacies of ancient gods were incredibly rare in the Greater God's domain, and even hegemonic powers would have difficulty getting their hands on one. It was also proven that every ancient god's legacy could overturn the status quo in the Greater God's domain. Needless to say, the legacy of the ancient Abyssal God, one of the oldest ancient gods in existence, wouldn't be in any way inferior in this regard. System, Abyssal Trial activated. Please kill all of the monsters on the 4th floor in 1 natural day. You will receive the legacy left behind by the ancient Abyssal God should you succeed. Kill all of the monsters on the 4th floor in one day? That's one difficult challenge. Shifeng's expression grew heavy when he saw the notification. According to the information Echoing Judgment provided, the Abyssal Tower had 5 floors. The number and strength of the monsters players faced would increase with each subsequent floor they climbed. Meanwhile, players would gain the civilian status in the city so long as they cleared the 1st floor, the noble status if they cleared the 2nd floor, and the upper-class noble status if they cleared the 3rd floor. Out of the hundreds of millions of players based on Slumber City, those who managed to become upper-class nobles did not exceed 100. Moreover, every one of these upper-class nobles was a veteran player who had honed their strength for many years. As for the 4th floor, not one person in Slumber City had managed to clear it thus far. This was because the Trial Tower's trial wasn't merely a simple test of a player's combat standards but rather a test of a player's adaptability. Shortly after Shifeng activated the Abyssal Trial, the scenery before him changed into a lush, primal forest. A gigantic hourglass had also appeared in the sky above him, showing his remaining time in the trial space. What a powerful mana suppression! After arriving in this primal forest, Shifeng promptly felt an invisible force suppressing his mana. The suppression was so strong that none of his mana could flow out of his body. Moreover, he found that apart from dark element mana, no other elements were present around him. So that's why there are so few upper-class nobles even though there are so many 3rd floor experts in the city. Just this mana suppression alone is enough to reduce a player's combat power to 10% or lower, Shifeng thought in realization. Mana suppression was a much more troublesome penalty than the prohibition of mana usage. The prohibition of mana usage would only prevent players from using skills and spells. However, the suppression of mana would not only prevent players from using skills and spells, but it would also make it incredibly difficult for players to use combat techniques. This was because the constant disruption to the mana inside a player's body would prevent the player from exerting stable and precise control over their bodies. Naturally, executing mana techniques would be even more of an impossible challenge. Meanwhile, if players couldn't use any skills, spells, combat techniques, or mana techniques, they would be left with only normal attacks. In such a situation, one could easily imagine how much of their original combat power players would be left with. Before Shifeng could adapt to this new and hostile environment, 2 level 110 Great Lord ranked Abyssal Hounds emerged from the surrounding bushes and lunged at him. Abyssal Hound, Demonic Beast, Great Lord, level 110 HP 60 million. Shifeng unsheathed the Winter of Eternal Night and swung it almost instinctively when he sensed the Abyssal Hounds. However, before his attack could connect, the 2 Abyssal Hounds sensed it and reacted like veteran experts, twisting their bodies in mid-air and evading the attack with less than half a centimeter to spare. They're at the refinement realm? Shifeng was stunned by the 2 Abyssal Hounds' actions. He might not have gone all out with his attack, and there was a slight delay in his execution, but he still had basic attributes at the Tier 4 standard. Even if the Abyssal Hounds were agility-type Great Lords, they still shouldn't be able to dodge his attack unless they were at the refinement realm standard. However, Shifeng didn't have any time to dwell on this matter. While he was in a daze, the 2 Abyssal Hounds simultaneously activated the Tier 3 skill Flame Roar. Flame Roar was an AoE attack. Shifeng dared not face the attacks head-on, so he promptly sidestepped twice and evaded the Abyssal Hound's flame roars. Then, he lunged forward and executed a downward strike at the nearest Abyssal Hound. Shifeng's attack this time was much faster than before. With the Abyssal Hound's nearly 2-meter-long body, there was no way it could evade the attack in time. Clang! Sparks flew, followed by a metallic clang that echoed throughout the forest. Just when Shifeng's sword was about to hit the Abyssal Hound, the Great Lord had leaped backward with its large frame and deflected the weapon with its front claws. Although the impact had sent the Abyssal Hound flying several meters backward and landing on the ground unsteadily, the Great Lord had lost less than 200,000 HP from the exchange. The Abyssal Hound had 60 million HP, so this damage was nothing. It could recover to full HP once its battle recovery ticked 5 seconds later. It even knows how to deflect attacks. When Shifeng looked at the Abyssal Hound that was baring its fangs at him, he suddenly felt as if he was facing a veteran refinement realm expert rather than a dumb monster. Moreover, this was a refinement realm expert with the basic attributes of a Tier 3 Great Lord. Before Shifeng could launch another attack, 3 more Abyssal Hounds slowly stepped out of the surrounding bushes and coordinated with the first 2 Abyssal Hounds to form an encirclement around Shifeng. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 31:10 When Shifeng looked at the 5 Abyssal Hounds surrounding him, he quickly understood why so many players in Slumber City still didn't have the civilian status. When Shifeng looked at the 5 Abyssal Hounds surrounding him, he quickly understood why so many players in Slumber City still didn't have the civilian status. The Abyssal Tower's first floor trial alone was already pitting players against 5 Great Lords with combat standards at the Refinement Realm. Not to mention, the trial also subjected players to a powerful mana suppression. Even a Refinement Realm expert fully geared in top-tier epic weapons and equipment would only meet with death in such a situation. The only way a Refinement Realm expert could conquer the first floor trial was using brute force. Players could not leave the Abyssal Tower even after dying in the trial. Instead, they would be resurrected within the trial space without losing any EXP. In contrast, monsters killed in the trial could not resurrect. Their HP wouldn't even be reset when players died. Instead, they could only recover their HP by relying on their recovery. In other words, they could only recover 2% of their HP every 5 seconds. Thus, if players were sufficiently tenacious and possessed sufficiently high basic attributes, it was theoretically possible for them to complete the first floor trial. Since the monsters will grow stronger the further I progress, I'll use you guys to adapt to this environment first. When Shifeng saw the 5 Abyssal Hounds gradually closing in on him, he didn't take the initiative to attack. Instead, he entered a defensive state and focused on adapting to his current environment. There were only several dozen players who had managed to clear the Abyssal Tower's 3rd floor in Slumber City. Logically, one would assume that every one of these players was a top-ranking Temple Knight. However, that wasn't the case at all. Many of these players weren't even Temple Knights, let alone top-ranking Temple Knights. The reason for this strange phenomenon was because most players in Slumber City had failed to adapt to the Abyssal Tower's combat environment. Conversely, the non-Temple Knight players had learned to adapt to the environment in the Abyssal Tower and maximize the use of their combat power. Adding on the fact that there were no death restrictions, it wasn't exactly impossible for these supposedly weak players to whittle the monsters in the trial to death. Thus, what Shifeng needed to do now was simple: learn to adapt to the trial's environment. If he were to wait until he reached the 3rd or 4th floors to do so, the difficulty would increase drastically. Learning to adapt to the trial's combat environment wasn't a difficult task for Shifeng, either. As a Grandmaster Magician, the understanding and control he had over mana were far superior to the average expert. Since the trial was interfering with the flow of his mana, what he needed to do was figure out a way to make his mana flow along with this powerful interference. Of course, accomplishing this feat was easier said than done. It was especially so since he was currently in combat. Meanwhile, with each subsequent attempt Shifeng made to adapt to the interference, the flow of mana in his body also became smoother and smoother. After the trial went on for a little over an hour, Shifeng suddenly swung his sword and sent the 5 Abyssal Hounds flying over a dozen meters away. He also left a bone-deep wound in each of the Great Lords and caused them to lose over 1,000,000 HP. Sure enough, I managed to recover a good portion of my strength after adapting the flow of my mana to this mana suppression. Although I can only use 60% of my usual strength, using basic combat techniques from time to time shouldn't be a problem anymore, Shifeng thought as he looked at the damage he had caused to the Abyssal Hounds. Then, he turned his gaze to the Winter of Eternal Night in his hand and furrowed his brows, thinking, but why does this new flow pattern look like it's trying to draw a magic array inside my body? He wouldn't have noticed this little detail if it were before he had become a primal human and gained the eyes of reality. However, thanks to his enhanced senses, he could clearly feel that the flow of the dark mana within him was being used to outline a very complicated magic array. Moreover, this magic array was so ingeniously designed that its construction did not affect the flow of the dark mana within him in the slightest. It was essentially watching someone using the existing parts in a machine to perform an entirely different action without modifying the parts. The complexity of this magic array is roughly at the master standard. With the current control I have, I should be able to replicate it. After pondering for a moment, Shifeng decided to try drawing the magic array. Based on his observation, this magic array was designed to operate with dark mana specifically. It could not accommodate any of the other elements at all. This meant that players would need to draw the magic array using dark mana only. The level of control required to accomplish this task was so high that even experts with mana domains would find it incredibly challenging. Fortunately, the Abyssal Tower's environment had greatly suppressed the flow of the other elements. So, Shifeng had a much easier time manipulating the dark mana within his body. Subsequently, Shifeng resumed evading the Abyssal Hound's attacks while drawing that special magic array using his dark mana. His first attempt failed. His second attempt also failed. Although Shifeng faced failure after failure, each failed attempt also increased his familiarity with the drawing process. Initially, he could only draw the magic array's contour. However, gradually, he started producing magic arrays with great clarity. After a little over a dozen hours and several hundred failed attempts later, success. After evading the attack of an Abyssal Hound, Shifeng suddenly opened his eyes and swung his sword. This time, Shifeng did not sense any suppression coming from his surrounding environment. On the contrary, his body felt much lighter than normal. He even had a feeling that his body had merged with the surrounding space. When Shifeng swung his sword, a dark light briefly enveloped the weapon before it connected with the Abyssal Hound. Immediately afterward, the Great Lord got sent flying over 100 meters away like a ragdoll, its HP falling by 10%. What a powerful amplification effect! Shifeng was greatly surprised as he looked at the dissipating dark light surrounding the winter of eternal night. This magic array can forcibly increase the strength of a player's mana. The biggest difference that separated players of different tiers was the strength of their mana. The higher a player's tier, the stronger the mana within their body would become. Meanwhile, the stronger a player's mana, the greater the destructive power they could exhibit with their attacks. It was similar to how the spells of magical class players would become more powerful when cast in an environment with dense mana. Yet, the Trial Space's magic array could forcibly increase the strength of a player's mana. Although the magic array's effect required an environment rich in dark mana to achieve peak performance, it was amazing nonetheless. After all, apart from some rare weapons, equipment, and tools, the only other way players could increase the strength of their mana was by increasing their tier. Yet, this magic array allowed players to achieve a similar effect without having to rely on anything aside from their bodies. This magic array would shake even the greater god's domain if its existence was made known. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 31 11_ After Shifeng heavily injured one of the Abyssal Hounds, the 4 other Abyssal Hounds seemingly got stimulated as they stopped executing any evasive maneuvers. Instead, they began frenziedly trading blow for blow with Shifeng. As soon as Shifeng attacked one Abyssal Hound, the other 3 promptly moved to his sides and either tried to bite him or attack him with Tier 3 skills and spells. After Shifeng heavily injured one of the Abyssal Hounds, the 4 other Abyssal Hounds seemingly got stimulated as they stopped executing any evasive maneuvers. Instead, they began frenziedly trading blow for blow with Shifeng. As soon as Shifeng attacked one Abyssal Hound, the other 3 promptly moved to his sides and either tried to bite him or attack him with Tier 3 skills and spells. This reckless way of fighting was one of the tactics players used most frequently in PvP. It was also the most troublesome fighting method for players to deal with. Meanwhile, if the Abyssal Hounds were to employ this strategy against a Refinement Realm expert of the same level, the expert would have no choice but to trade life for life if they wanted to clear the trial. This is a good decision. Unfortunately, it is useless against me. Shifeng smiled as he looked at the 3 Abyssal Hounds attacking him. Immediately, he switched his footwork and activated the Tier 3 skill Dispersing Slash. After drawing the magic array in his body, Shifeng could feel the mana suppression acting on him, losing 80% of its effect. In his current state, not only could he use combat techniques normally, but he could also use skills and spells. Though, due to the surrounding environment, the effects of his skills and spells would be weakened significantly. Immediately, several dozen sword lights shot out to Shifeng's surroundings, every one of these sword lights destabilizing the space around them as they pierced through the three abyssal hounds. Boom! 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 Once the sword lights disappeared, the forest around Shifeng became littered with small craters. As for the three abyssal hounds, each of them lost over 10 million HP and fell into a heavily injured state. Even an ordinary Tier 3 player could kill them effortlessly in their current state. The magic array increased my destructive power to such an extent. Shifeng was astonished when he saw how his attack had heavily injured the abyssal hounds and deformed the surrounding terrain. Isn't this power already close to the level of a Tier 4 skill used by an actual Tier 4 player? The reason there was a massive gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 players was because the destructive power the two could exhibit were on entirely different levels. It was true that Tier 3 players were akin to superhumans. However, when it came to destructive power, Tier 3 players were only at the level of destroying large boulders with their attacks. However, upon reaching Tier 4, players would have the ability to single-handedly destroy an entire city. Meanwhile, Shifeng undoubtedly possessed this ability already. In addition to having basic attributes and physique rivaling Tier 4 players, the strength of his mana was also at the Tier 4 standard now. The only difference that separated him from an actual Tier 4 player now was his lack of Tier 4 skills and spells. At this moment, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was a pseudo-Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Subsequently, Shifeng defeated all 5 abyssal hounds in under 30 seconds, received a huge amount of EXP, and leveled up to level 111 directly. After Shifeng defeated the 5 abyssal hounds on the first floor, the scenery around him instantly changed, and he found himself standing on a desolate wasteland facing a bunch of Grand Lord-ranked minotaurs. Meanwhile, as soon as these large minotaurs saw Shifeng, they promptly attacked him with their tridents. While time passed inside the abyssal tower, the number of players gathered in the abyssal tower's lobby also continued increasing. What's going on? Why are all of Death Curse's experts here? It's not just Death Curse. Purple Light has also gathered all of its experts. Could they be planning on fighting here? I heard that Death Curse tried to rob Purple Light's caravan and failed. On top of that, Death Curse also lost an advanced combat puppet. This is a huge loss for Death Curse since losing that advanced combat puppet was no different than losing one of its minds. It'd be strange if Death Curse didn't try to take revenge for this loss. It's not Purple Light that destroyed Death Curse's advanced combat puppet. I heard that it was the doing of a group of outsiders. No wonder Death Curse has mobilized so many people. Death Curse has always vied to become the 4th ranking power in Slumber City. Now that Solitary Soul has become a Vice City Lord, he's probably thinking of putting on a show of force by dealing with those outsiders. Quick, look. Wolf Emperor is here. When the players in the lobby saw how many experts were gathered in the abyssal tower, they faintly realized that the status quo in Slumber City might be changing today. It was especially true after they saw Wolf Emperor, one of Slumber City's top 5 experts, making an appearance. Why is Wolf Emperor here? Night Revenant's expression turned somber when he looked at the middle-aged man carrying 2 greatswords on his back. Wolf Emperor. This was a name known by every player operating in Slumber City. He was also the role model for the many independent experts in Slumber City. Wolf Emperor had merely been your average refinement realm expert 20 years ago. Wolf Emperor had also been in his 30s already at the time, so one could say that he had already reached the limits of his potential. The best he could hope for with his slowed growth was to reach the flowing water realm in this lifetime. However, that wasn't what had happened at all. Unlike the average genius who'd shine from a young age, Wolf Emperor was the very definition of a late bloomer. He had reached the Void Realm at 40, the Domain Realm at 45, and Slumber City's top 50 rankings at 50. Now, at the age of 54, Wolf Emperor had become publicly acknowledged as one of Slumber City's top 5 experts. Moreover, Wolf Emperor didn't become famous just by growing stronger at a late age. He had also grown his fame through a series of battles. Wolf Emperor was a living inspiration for many players who were either deemed to have no talent or exhausted their potential. In fact, some of the current Temple Knights in Slumber City had only gained their current status because of the motivation they received from looking at Wolf Emperor's achievements. Hence, Wolf Emperor had become a living legend in Slumber City, and many Temple Knight level experts had willingly become his followers. Although Wolf Emperor had never established an organization of his own, he was the player with the most Temple Knight level experts under his command. Wolf Emperor himself was also an upper-class noble, an existence inferior to only Slumber City's 3 administrators. Now that Wolf Emperor had shown up in the Abyssal Tower, Knight Revenant would be delusional if he said that Wolf Emperor's appearance wouldn't affect Death Curse's plans. While Knight Revenant was having a headache over Wolf Emperor's appearance, a dark figure suddenly appeared in the lobby. This dark figure moved silently. However, the instant this dark figure appeared, everyone in the lobby felt chills crawling down their backs. Some Temple Knight level experts even stepped back, their minds subconsciously telling them to keep their distance from this dark figure. Commander. When Knight Revenant saw this dark figure, confidence surged within him once more. This was because this dark figure was none other than Solitary Soul, the commander of the Death Curse Adventurer team and Slumber City's publicly acknowledged #1 expert. What's the situation? Solitary Soul asked Knight Revenant in a low voice. They'll be coming out soon. Once they come out, we'll lock onto them immediately and ensure that none of them can hide their names or run away, Knight Revenant reported respectfully. While Slumber City's various powers and experts were gradually gathering in the Abyssal Tower, Shifeng had finally defeated the last mythic-ranked twin-headed flying dragon on the Abyssal Tower's 4th floor. At the same time, his level had also gone up from 112 to 113. Thank goodness I'm a pseudo-tier 4 right now. Otherwise, it'd be impossible to clear this 4th floor. Shifeng breathed a sigh of relief as he looked at the 9 twin-headed flying dragons around him. He had to die several times to eliminate all 9 of these mythic monsters. The twin-headed flying dragons had 2 billion HP each. If his mana hadn't been strengthened to the tier 4 standard, he would have never been able to kill all 9 of these mythic monsters. After all, even with his mana strengthened, he could only deal a few million damage with his tier 3 skills and spells. Even a solid blow with a bronze combat technique only allowed him to deal 4 to 5 million damage. Meanwhile, along with the collapse of the final twin-headed flying dragon, a system notification rang in Shifeng's ears. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3112 System. Congratulations. You have completed the Abyssal Trial and gained the Abyssal Tower's recognition. Rewarding the Abyss Legatee title. System. Congratulations. You have completed the Abyssal Trial and gained the Abyssal Tower's recognition. Rewarding the Abyss Legatee title. System. With the Abyss Legatee title, you will enjoy status equivalent to a magistrate in any city in the stratified Abyssal realm. In addition, all Dark-type monsters within a 200-yard radius of you will be weakened by 30%. System. You have activated the mythical quest Twilight of the Gods. A mythical quest? Shifeng's mind blanked out when he saw the system notifications, his mind having difficulty believing this to be true. In the world of God's domain, even epic quests were already enough to cause Apex experts to grow ecstatic. This was because the rewards of any epic quest could offer even Tier 5 experts to achieve qualitative improvements, the rewards ranging anywhere from fragmented legendary items to powerful legacy items. However, epic quests were both loved and hated by players. This was because players would be given a severe penalty should they fail to complete an epic quest. Some epic quests could even ruin a player's whole account. As for legendary quests, which were one rank above epic quests, they could cause an entire God's domain to go crazy. This was because any legendary quest could rewrite the status quo in an entire God's domain. The completion of a legendary quest could easily result in the birth of a new superpower. Hence, even Tier 6 God-ranked experts were constantly searching for clues relating to legendary quests. As for mythical quests, which were one rank above legendary quests, the chances of one appearing in a god's domain was almost zero. This was because quests of this rank could affect the entire greater god's domain. In the greater god's domain, standing above the various peak powers and hegemonic powers were apex powers. How powerful were apex powers exactly? Any power that dared to bare its fangs against an apex power would disappear from the greater god's domain. Either that or they would choose to submit under a different apex power. There was no third option. Meanwhile, the main reason the greater god's domain's apex powers were able to achieve their current positions was because every one of them had completed a mythical quest. Thanks to the mythical quest they completed, they were able to establish foundations and gain power beyond the imagination of the various hegemonic powers. Unfortunately, mythical quests were exceedingly rare, so much so that the various hegemonic powers were willing to pay one legendary item just for a clue that could potentially lead to a mythical quest. During Shifeng's previous life, he had spent several years just to find a few clues relating to mythical quests. Even then, his findings were more than enough to cause the various top-tier hegemonic powers to grow envious. After all, those top-tier hegemonic powers were only short of one mythical quest to become an apex power. Yet, now, Shifeng had directly activated a mythical quest. Shortly after the system notifications appeared, a gigantic shadow figure suddenly appeared in front of Shifeng. The instant this shadowy figure appeared, Shifeng felt an unprecedented power bearing down on his body. This power was so strong that it made the divine might of Tier 6 gods look insignificant in comparison. Right now, Shifeng had a feeling that the shadowy figure before him could erase his entire existence with just a thought. Even Tier 6 gods would probably have difficulty moving before this shadowy figure. "You've done a good job completing the abyssal trial, little lifeform," the shadowy figure said as he nodded at Shifeng. "But you are still too weak to obtain my legacy. Even holding on to my legacy might cause you to suffer unimaginable disasters in God's domain. If you wish to inherit my legacy, you will need to obtain one item first. Find the original at H*stead novel. Obtain one item?" Shifeng wasn't all too surprised by the shadowy figure's claim that his legacy would bring unimaginable disasters. The shadowy figure might only be a phantom of his real self, but he was already the strongest existence Shifeng had met to date. If the shadowy figure appeared with his real body, Shifeng couldn't even begin to imagine how powerful the other party would be. So, the difficulty of obtaining the shadowy figure's legacy would naturally be incredibly high. "Yes. I'll leave this item with you. Figure out a way to restore its power. Only after it has recovered can it help you inherit my legacy." After saying so, the shadowy figure waved his hand and summoned a pitch-black ancient tome in front of Shifeng. Unlike the average book, this ancient tome exuded an aura rivaling that of Tier 6 gods. An ordinary Tier 3 expert couldn't even get near this ancient tome, let alone hold it with their hands. The 7 Luminaries Codex. Shifeng was dumbfounded when he received the ancient tome. Current players of God's domain were most likely unfamiliar with the 7 Luminaries Codex. Even the various superguilds were unlikely to know about it. At best, they would know about the 7 Luminaries scripture. The complete 7 Luminaries scripture's value could be said to be above legendary items. This was because the scripture contained many forbidden magic arrays. With the complete scripture in hand, players could even use craftsman rank magic arrays to seal Tier 6 god-ranked experts. However, the 7 Luminaries scripture was only a replica of the 7 Luminaries Codex. Even the 7 treasures that existed in God's domain were merely items the 3 goddesses made to replicate the codex. Of course, the 7 Luminaries Codex before Shifeng wasn't the complete version. Instead, it was only a fragmented item. Or, more specifically, it was the codex's general outline. It was rumored that the 7 Luminaries Codex was one of the godly relics that had existed since the birth of God's domain. It was also rumored that it had the power to destroy an entire God's domain. Of course, these were merely the descriptions recorded in the Greater God's Domain's Great Galaxy Library. Whether these descriptions were true or false, nobody knew. This was because nobody had managed to obtain even the smallest of clues regarding the 7 Luminaries Codex throughout the several hundred years the Greater God's Domain had existed. First, Find a way to recover its power. We will meet again once it is fully recovered. However, you best restore it as soon as possible since it won't last long with its current power. If you cannot find the 7 remaining fragments in time, it will disappear completely with no hope of restoration, the shadowy figure said before disappearing. Before Shifeng could say anything, another system notification rang in his ears. System, congratulations. You have accepted the mythical quest Twilight of the Gods. Quest content, restore the 7 Luminaries Codex before its power fades completely. Rewards unknown. Penalties unknown. Sure enough, I don't have any refusal rights. Shifeng didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he looked at the 7 Luminaries Codex in his hands. The 7 Luminaries Codex was a bona fide godly relic. If he managed to fully restore it, even Tier 6 God-ranked experts would have to run if they saw him. Even Tier 6 God-ranked experts with legendary weapons were no exception. Of course, this great power came with a correspondingly great price. If he failed to complete this mythical quest, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even account deletion would probably be considered the lightest penalty for failing a mythical quest. Thinking up to this point, Shifeng couldn't help but tap his finger on the 7 Luminaries Codex, eager to see what was on the 7 Luminaries Codex's attribute panel. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,